I don't know why our video's not working. There we go. Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Good morning.
Morning. Today's chapter is way more interesting than last week's chapter, which was kind of a snooze fest. So hopefully you're on board to learn about personality. Because last time was boring. Find one more thing. These images.
Professor, I got a question about the journal.
Okay, just
Last-
give me
last-
2 seconds. Just give me 2 seconds. I just want to pull up Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I just want to get this video, this up for you so that when we go to it, it's up. Okay. Hold on a sec. Go. You had a question?
Yeah. Last week was the last journal, right?
I extended it. You don't, I'll talk about it a little bit, but
All right.
I did give you another week to do it because I didn't tell you that it was due. Because to be
Mhm.
honest with you, I didn't realize that it was already due. I thought it went, remember, this is the first time we've done this. This is in lieu of a final. So this is the first time that we've done it. So I didn't realize it ends at week 11. So I didn't tell you guys it was due. So I'm making it due this week.
Okay.
But we'll go over it. I'll just wait for a few more to join. We're not even at half yet. So let's wait a couple minutes, like in 1 more minute. And then we'll go through that. We'll talk a little bit about the final thing. We'll talk about a bunch of stuff. It's getting towards the end of the semester and people fall off. You don't have a lot of people on. Okay, so this is week 12. I am going to share my screen and we're going to kind of go over what's coming up for the rest of the semester. Okay, so we are in week 12. Now, actually, I'm going to go to week 11, which was last week. And I'm going to show you guys that I didn't realize that the journal was due last Friday. And what I say about the journal was that it was weeks 8, 9, 10, 11, and your final goal assessment. And your final goal assessment says, did you reach the goals that you had set for yourself for the Intro to Psych course? Okay, so it's weeks 8, 9, 10, 11, and final goal assessment. So that's 5 things that should be with your journal entries. So your last one, the one that was for the 11th, should include final goal assessment. But because I didn't tell you, I opened it back up so that you have till this Saturday to do it. So you have the time to do it. Any questions about journal?
So the chapter 11 journal, it's what we learned and how we're going to process in life. And then I can write another paragraph on if I reach my goal or not to resubmit it.
Exactly. You have to,
Okay, because
you have to
I submitted,
revisit. Perfect, Jake. You have to revisit the goal that you created for yourself we didn't start in week 1 because they didn't assign it in week 1. So I think it was in week 2 you had to rate your goals and go revisit them in week 2 and write about it. So that has to be part of it, the goal assessment. But you can't the thing that I have to be clear with everybody is that you're not going back and doing weeks 1 through 7. Those are closed. That was your midterm. So those are closed. So you can only do 8, 9, 10, 11, and goal assessment.
just wanted to ask, thank you.
Sure. No, you got it. Anybody else have any questions on journal? Okay, so you're done with journal. So after that, you don't have anything to do but what's due in the chapter and to do with the final week. So let's just quickly go back to week 15 because you should be working on this. Now, remember, for week 15, you are doing a slide and video presentation of your article paper. Now, I have to tell you, the majority of the papers were good, but if you got a 6 or anything lower, that meant your paper was not good. So you need to revamp your paper in order to make this 10-minute presentation correct. You just can't keep building on it not being right. Do you understand what I'm saying? So if you didn't do good on the article review, I told you to go back and redo the article reviews. And if your paper isn't right, then you need to, for yourself, either redo the paper or redo the article reviews because your paper wasn't right. So if you did less than a 7, then I would recommend you redoing, honestly. Questions about, as you're starting to think about this week 15, do you have any questions about that? No? Okay, well, good. Okay, so then let's jump in. So just to give you an idea about what to expect for the rest of the semester, because the end is in sight, we can see it. We're in week 12. This week 12, we're doing personality. It's a much better chapter than last chapter. Last chapter was boring. The next couple chapters are good. So we do personality today. We do psychological disorders next week. And then we do the therapy and the treatments about the psychological disorders on week 15. And I mean, on week 14. And then week 15 is basically to get your project in. Your project is due on May 11th. That's what day your project is done. Oh, wait, no, I lied. It says it's May 15th. I have to, I think I have to adjust that. Because I think it says May 11th in the, let me just write myself a note. Project May 15th. I'll check to see. 5/15. I thought it said 11th on the thing, so we have to make sure. Might be that it opens on that day, but it's due on May 15th. So ask me questions now about that.
I don't have any as of right now.
I got one. The video, is it a video and like speaking over it, or is it just speaking over it?
So it's the best way for me to say it is it's a PowerPoint presentation that is taped with you speaking over it. So pretend as if you were doing a PowerPoint presentation to the class and you were talking over it. The difference is that we're not in a classroom. So you have to tape it to send it to me. So you can either, you don't have to be on screen. Sometimes I get students that do their video presentation and they have themselves up in the corner. You don't have to be seen on screen. That doesn't matter, but I have to be able to hear you guide the PowerPoint presentation. And if I have to say, the most important thing is that I have 2 eyes and I can read. You should not be reading your slides. That's the most important thing to take away. You should not be reading your slides. You should have minimal information on your slides and maximum information that you're telling me. You should be explaining what I see on the slide. So do not read your slides. You are, if a slide says psychodynamic perspective, you should be saying that it's the theoretical views emphasizing that personality is primarily unconscious. Do you understand what I'm saying? You're not reading me your slides. You're telling me information. You're using the slides as a guide.
Got it.
Questions? No? All right, so, and we can do it each week as we get there. This week is week 12. We are doing personality. What is due this week? So you're going to do your study plan. You're going to take your quiz. You're going to do the journal. Even though it doesn't say it here, I opened it back up and you're going to make sure your journal's in. So the assignment this week is kind of fun. The assignment is that you need to take at least 2 of the personality tests here. They're all links to personality tests, okay? And you're going to take the tests and it's going to tell you something about your personality and about you. So what you're going to do is you are going to write an assignment. It is not a discussion post. You're not doing the writing on other people's posts, though it still amazes me how many are incomplete of that. That's crazy. But for this one, you guys are going to take 2 personality tests. Then you are going to talk to somebody that knows you and discuss the results and write a short essay describing the tests, describing the results. You have to talk about validity and reliability. That's important because that is the terminology on personality tests. Were they valid and were they reliable? And you can also talk about what that person who knows you well said about it. Like, let's say you take the test and you like, I'm not stubborn. And then you talk to your father and your father's like, wow, that was right on the money. You are so stubborn. So you're going to write on there that I didn't think it was accurate, but my father thought it was 100% accurate. So if this is kind of a fun one for your assignment, it's worth 40 points. So questions on the assignment?
I think I understand how to do it.
Good. Anybody else? Okay. Good. All right. So let's jump into chapter 10 and talk a little bit about personality. And the first theorist that's your chapter talks about is Sigmund Freud, because he did a lot of personality discussions and he was the first one who really talked about personality. Does anybody remember what his particular type of therapy was called? Does anybody remember? It's different than everybody else's. Take a guess. It starts with the word psycho.
Psychological?
Not psychological. Anybody else? Only Freudian. Can't use this word for anything else. Only Freudian. Anyone? Psychoanalysis. Psychoanalysis means that is purely Freudian psychology. This word does not get used in any other terminology. Psychoanalysis. So he developed psychoanalysis through the work of patients. He used the word hysteria. When people were psychologically ill, they had hysteria. And he is, or I should say, was the most influential psychologist that we study. When we talked about hysteria, we talk about the fact that people had some sort of psychological ailment, and because of that, they had a form of a physical ailment that went along with their psychological ailment. So Freud said that there are 3 parts of personality. Does anybody know what the 3 parts of personality are according to Freud?
Is one of them ego?
You are correct. That's one. What's another one?
I know it's 2 egos, but I don't know the last one. Something ego and then another ego.
Super ego, and what everybody says wrong, but it's called the id, ego, and superego. The id, the ego, and the superego. Now, if you guys go on to take any other psychology class, this will be part of it because this is the groundwork for personality. So the id, and not the ID, the id is your unconscious drives. And remember, it's Freud, so everything's sexual. So the id is the unconscious drives and their sexual energy. The ego is the reality. And the superego is kind of the judge of behavior. So we like to say that the id is the pleasure principle, the ego is the reality principle, and the superego is the ideals and standards. So if you were talking about having like an angel and a devil on your shoulder, the angel would be the superego, and the devil would be the id. That's how you would describe these 3 systems of personality. So Freud's id, ego, and superego, the best way to show you is in an image. Does anybody know what the famous Freud image is of your personality and the id, the ego, and the superego? Does anybody know? I'm going to show you them. Of course, it's behind here, so I can't get to it. Oh my gosh. I cannot get to it because of the sharing screen. There we go. It's an iceberg. So Freudian, the most common way of talking about personality is an iceberg, because you have basically, he talks about the conscious and the unconscious and then your pre-conscious. But here's the thing about an iceberg, and this is what has to do with personality. And think about this. What you see, this stuff right here, is very little about what's under the water with an iceberg. And the same goes for your personality. What you see of a person is such a minute part of who they are because they could have a horrible past. They could have had a horrible childhood. There could be violence. There could be alcoholism, depression, all kinds of stuff. But you are seeing such a small part of who a person is by what you see outwardly. And so they use this iceberg as the analogy about personality, but it actually has to do with who you are. Think about it. The person that you present in the, hour and 20 minutes once a week in class is such a small part of who you are, right? And your personality. So we use Freud's iceberg analogy to discuss that the part that's above water, the conscious part of your mind and your personality, is so much smaller than what's below the water. Does everybody understand that analogy? You got it? So part of when Freud talked about personality, he said that we use all kinds of defense mechanisms. And I know that you've heard of defense mechanisms. You've heard of ones that are obvious, like denial, which help people cope with most of the time bad something. You've heard about repression, where people repress bad news. There's such a thing called displacement. You'll learn all of each individual defense mechanisms in the chapter, but what you have to understand is that part of personality that you don't try to do it. It happens naturally, and it comes to your defenses for your personality. According to Freud, personality development was based in, now remember, he's all about sex, so it's psychosexual stages. So your first 18 months of life, you're in an oral stage, which is, children basically eat, and they suck on pacifiers or their fingers or whatever. That is their oral stage, and it's the pleasure center is the mouth. And then from 18 months to 36 months, it is considered the anal stage, and that's got to do with toilet training. And then it moves on from 3 to 6 years to what's known as the phallic stage, which is about sexual organs. And then it goes into, from 6 years to puberty, it goes into what's known as the latency stage, which is basically a timeout on the psychosexual stages. And then it goes back into at puberty, the genital stage, which is a sexual reawakening, the genital stage. So these are Freud's psychosexual stages, which centers on the part of the body that is at the time. Now, according to him, it's pleasurable. And he uses the words erogenous zone because it's pleasure. That would make it the id stage. Remember, pleasure principle. And if you have some sort of trauma during one of these stages, you could end up being fixated. So somebody who had some sort of trauma in the oral stage might be somebody who still puts everything in their mouth as an adult, or somebody who sometimes they equate smoking with the oral stage because it brings them pleasure of the oral stage. Somebody who bites on their pencils. You guys have heard about an anal fixation. It's got nothing really to do with the butt. It's got to do with being the term anal being very fixed and organized and strict and not wavering. So there's fixation, which means you get stuck at one of those stages. So this is all Freud. Now, Freud has one more piece of his theories, and it has to do with the Oedipus complex. If anybody took Greek mythology, you might have heard of this. Does anybody know what the Oedipus complex is? Can you tell us?
I never took Greek mythology.
Anybody? Anyone? Okay, so the concept is from Greek mythology, but actually Freud bought into it as a stage of sexual awakening, because everything's about sex with Freud, is that a boy has an unbelievable love or sexual desire for his mother. And because of that, he's in competition with his father for her attention. Okay. This is Freudian and this is Greek mythology, that a boy, now if you want to equate that to times now, you could say that a boy has love for his mother and fights for his mother's attention with dad, but not in a sexual way like Freud would say. Now, the same goes for little girls and their dads, and that's called the Electra complex. When we talk about a little girl that has an unbelievable love for their father, and they are in competition with their mother for the attention and the affection, that's called the Electra complex. But when we talk about Freud, which is why we're bringing it up, we are saying that it is almost like a sexual competition. So after Freud, some psychologists were studying Freud and they said, this is so like sexual. We need to come up with different personality theories that aren't all based on sex. So another group of theorists that came over were called the Neo-Freudians, because they were changing what Freud had come up with. So they're called Neo-Freudians. And they had different theories that weren't so based on sex. So the first one that we'll talk about is Carl Jung. Carl Jung came up with, similar to having like stages of personality. He said you do have an ego, but he felt you had a personal conscious and a personal unconscious. So Jung said, and his was kind of an analytical theory. He said that experiences of a common past are what make you who you are. So he said you have what's known as a collective unconscious, which was Jung's name for an impersonal layer of the unconscious mind, that all human beings might share that. So you still have that ego, and then you, which is the conscious part, and then you have these unconscious. So you have your personal unconscious, which is your own memories, your thoughts, your feelings that are all to do with you. And then you have this collective unconscious, which you share with other people, which are like universal experiences. And he did come up with a word that you might hear. He said, he defined the word archetypes. They're shared ideas and images universally, these archetypes. So, there are a couple other Neo-Freudians. There is Karen Horney, which is an ironic last name because she couldn't stand that Freud was so sexual. So she felt that it was more of a sociocultural approach. She felt that social and cultural influences on personality development were very important. One of the words that Freud had said about women was that they had penis envy. So Horney was like, nope, women do not have penis envy. And she believed that people have a need for security. She felt that security was what motivated people's personalities, which was opposite than Freud, which said that people's personality was motivated by sex. She felt that people were motivated by security. And the last Neo-Freudian that you'll learn about in your chapter is Alfred Adler. Alfred Adler, who talked about, I'm sure you guys have heard the term an inferiority complex. Have you guys heard of that? An inferiority complex?
Yep.
He coined that one. He coined that. He said that people are motivated by their own purposes and goals, and that being right is more important than sex. So making things done right is the key motivator in human life. Adler thought that everyone strives for superiority by seeking to adapt, improve, and master their environment. And if you didn't, that's where the inferiority complex came in. So these Neo-Freudians had adapted all of Freud's ideas, which started with sex. And then these people, these Neo-Freudians, came about with saying it's not about sex. It's more about striving to do well and feeling good about yourself. Well, that turned into what was now known as the humanistic perspective. The humanistic perspective. So it changed from all that psychosexual and social stuff to more of a humanistic perspective. And that means that it's more about personal growth and positive human qualities. Okay, that's what the humanistic. So then different psychologists came about as part of the humanistic perspective, and the one that we talk about probably the most is Abraham Maslow. So has anybody seen Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Have you ever seen that? I will show it to you. All right. So what you have with Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a triangle shape with the goal being the top is self-actualization. But you can't go to the top unless you've reached the bottom levels. So your basic needs are your physiological needs. In order to survive, you need food, water, warmth, rest. And once you achieve physiological or requirements of human survival, you can now move up to another basic need is feeling safe. Security and safety, your personal security, your financial security, health and well-being. Once you have met those safety needs, then you can move up to belongingness and love needs, which have to do with friends, family, sexual intimacy, a sense of belonging and acceptance. Once you have met that belongingness and love needs, you then can move on to esteem needs. Esteem needs are self-esteem, confidence, achievement, respect for others, and respect by others. When you have met that esteem need, you can then reach the pinnacle, according to Maslow, of self-actualization. Self-actualization is what a person can be. He is. He has reached his or her full potential. Now, Maslow created this many moons ago. And I will also tell you that there is a group of people that feel that Maslow's hierarchy of needs should have one more level on that, and that is giving of yourself. Somebody who is very altruistic or gives to others at the expense of themselves is actually higher than self-actualized. So somebody actually who's in the military is giving themselves up for the country, they're actually one higher level than self-actualized, because they could quite possibly like lose their life for the sake of the United States. So there is a school of thought that says there's an extra level to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but that hierarchy was established a long time ago, and it still rings true to getting to being the best person that you can be, to be self-actualized. Another theorist that was humanistic was somebody named Carl Rogers. Carl Rogers, his theory on personality was that it's very person-centered. He was a key figure in the development of humanistic psychology, and he began his research into human nature with, and he said each person is born with a natural capacity for growth and fulfillment. And we also, he literally uses the terminology gut feeling. He says you're gifted with an innate sense, a gut feeling. He used that word, innate sense, that allows us to evaluate whether an experience is good or bad. So he says you guys can make those decisions on what is good for you. It's very person-centered. But we are born with a need for a positive regard from others. So even though it's person-centered, meaning it's yourself, we do, and that's called self-concept, right? When you talk about yourself, you're talking about your self-concept. But actually, we do have a need for acceptance. So yes, it's a self-concept, but we do have a need for acceptance. So they talk about happiness to do with Rogers. He talks about that. So the humanistics were talking all about self-regard and acceptance and empathy and sympathy. And another group of theorists after the humanistic said, you know what? It's not about how we feel. It's about the traits that we have. So from humanistic, we went over to the trait theorists, which was the theoretical views stressing that personality consists of traits that lead to our responses. Okay, so these trait theorists said that traits are the fundamental building blocks of personality, and that it is a consistent behavior across different situations. So a trait theorist might say, Jonathan is sociable and he likes to behave in an outgoing, happy fashion when he's at a party, but he'll also behave in an outgoing, happy fashion in a group study session, because those are Jonathan's traits. So the first guy to really discuss traits, his name was Gordon Allport. He was the father of American personality psychology. He rejected the notion that the unconscious was central to an understanding of personality. He didn't like the negative way humanistic theorists were portraying personality. He said personality psychology should focus on healthy, well-adjusted individuals and focus on their present lives, not their childhood experiences. And he dedicated himself to the idea that psychology should have relevance to social issues in today's society. So he said, we need to study healthy, well-adjusted individuals. Well, what's a healthy, well-adjusted individual? So he found criteria of what a healthy, well-adjusted individual was based on their traits. And he said they have to have a positive but objective sense of self. So in other words, they're a positive person, but they're realistic. They have to have an interest in other things beyond themselves. So they have to be interested in issues beyond their own experience. That's a healthy, well-adjusted individual. They have to have a sense of humor. They have to have a pretty positive philosophy of life. So it could be somebody that could have religion in their life, but it's not the be all end all. They're able to see outside of religion. And then the last thing he said is they need common sense. So they came up with 18,000 traits that people have. And then they factor them down to come up with personality. So this is where they start to really eke down on personality using these traits. And that's when personality tests came about. Once they factored down traits, then they can start doing personality tests. So in 1963, the big 5 factors of personality was really the first kind of way of testing. And the way to remember the big 5 factors of personality is the word ocean, because each letter in the word ocean is a trait. So the first one O is openness. So somebody who is high in openness is somebody who's pretty smart, open-minded, but has tolerance. C is conscientiousness, which has to do with achievement, relationships, health, and even longevity, which means living long. E is extroversion, which is somebody who engages in social activities and reports more positive life events. Agreeableness is related to, that's A, agreeableness, has to do with generosity. And N is neuroticism, which has to do with emotional stability. And it's more about negative emotion than positive emotion. So these are your big 5 factors of personality. So being that it's the first time that we're really able to test personality and personal traits.
Can you repeat them?
Sure. So the first O is openness, which is open-mindedness and tolerance. C is conscientiousness, which has to do with achievements, relationships, and health. E is extroversion. Extroversion is helping others and having social activities and having positive life events. Agreeableness. Agreeableness is related to generosity. And N is neuroticism, which is emotional instability. And it's related to more negative emotion than positive emotion.
All right, thanks.
Sure. So being that they started to look at all of these different traits, some words that they studied were that people, they have needs. So you have a need for achievement, you have a need for affiliation, which means to have people around you, you have a need for power. And when we say power, we're not talking about being the ruler of the world, but actually being the ruler of yourself, you know, having that power to make decisions, you know. So it was the first time that traits were studied to go along with personality. Remember, this is all about personality. So we're going to talk about the personality tests that you're going to be taking in your class, in your assignment a little bit later, but we're going to keep moving along because now that the trait theorists have come up with ways to test, then there have been other theories on personality. And the next theorist that came about with the social cognitive theory. So I'll write down their names about some of the guys that we'll talk about. There was Skinner, there was Bandura, and there was Walter and Michelle. So once we got through the trait theorist, we moved on to the social cognitive theory, which had to do with conscious awareness, beliefs, expectations, goals. They, social cognitive psychologists explored the person's ability to reason and to reflect, to reason and reflect. So Bandura was the first one who came up with this social cognitive theory. Actually, Skinner was really the first one, and he believed that there was no such thing as personality. He just felt that people had like mental states. And Bandura kind of said, nope, that's not right. He didn't think that Bandura didn't think that Skinner was right. Bandura said that there are mental processes that determine behavior. And he coined the term reciprocal determinism. I'm going to spell it right for you. Reciprocal determinism. Reciprocal determinism, that's a Bandura thought. And he said, reciprocal determinism is the way you describe behavior, the environment, and a person's factors, and they create the personality. So a lot goes into creating one's personality, is basically what he's saying with reciprocal determinism. All those things operate together. We have external and internal influences. And so when we talk about this, do you remember when we talked about that term locus of control? That if you're somebody that reads your horoscope every day, and depending on whatever the horoscope says, then you're going to go with that as how your day is going to go. If your horoscope says it's going to be a great day today, you'll find money, you'll find love, whatever, then you start off your day and you say, oh, it's going to be a great day. I'm going to find money. I'm going to find love, whatever it said. That would be an external locus of control. That would be somebody else telling you how your day is going to go. The majority of us have an internal locus of control, which we know we're responsible. So there are times that stuff happens that's beyond our control, but in general, we control. So when you get a bad grade on your homework, you know you didn't really give 100% effort for your homework, and that's why you didn't get the best grade. That's your internal locus of control. It's not because a teacher hates you or because somebody's unfair or the world's against you. It's because you didn't give what needed to happen for it. So if you're acknowledging that you're responsible, that's your internal locus of control. If you blame everything on your teachers or the world hates you or whatever, then that's an external locus of control. It means you don't have control over yourself. So that's what Bandura talks about, and Rotter is the one who came up with this locus of control. There's part of this social cognitive. We talked about Bandura's Bobo doll experiment. Remember I said to you, I think it was last week even, that observational learning is part of how people learn and part of their personality. So we gave the example with Bandura with the Bobo doll, where there were kids sitting in a room and there was this doll and an adult walked in and he beat it up. And the kids observed it and they learned it. And as soon as the adult walked out of the room, the kids just went to town on that Bobo doll because it's what they saw, it's what they knew, it's what they learned. That's observational learning. That's part of this social cognitive process. But you do have personal controls. That's your, locus of control. Walter Mischel, he critiqued this type of theory, and he said what the theory that people, lots of theories, guys, right? He said the CAPS theory, which stands for cognitive affective processing systems. And basically that describes our thoughts and emotions are about ourselves, but the world does affect our behavior. So it's how personality changes, not what you're given, but how personality changes. So there's other theorists. There's Hans Isaac, who talks about parts of the brain to do with personality. I'm not going to go into all of the role of neurotransmitters, but I think that you can understand the role of nature versus nurture in personality, because if you study twins and they are genetically predisposed to be 100% alike, and their personalities are supposed to be a certain way, right? Because they're genetically predisposed, and you put them in two different environments. Are their personalities going to change? Yes or no? How many people say that their personalities will 100% be the same, even in different environments? How many of you say that they'll stay the same?
They'll stay the same.
Anybody else? How many of you say their personalities will change with their environment?
Change.
Okay, Charles said it. Jonathan says it. What does Tori say? What does Sager say? Asai, they will change. Reagan, what do you say? You're clapping.
Oh, I meant the other one.
Oh, okay, so you're
I
saying
think
it'll
it would change.
Michaela says it'll change. Tori said it'll change. Anisha, what do you say?
Change.
How about Bryce?
I think they'll change.
Okay, how about Hagar? Hagar? Lena? Lena?
I as well think it'll change.
Okay, and Asya, did you answer? I wasn't sure. Asya?
Yes, I did answer. I typed it in the chat.
Okay, so you said change?
Yeah, I said change.
Okay, so the answer is change. You are correct. The majority of you are correct. And the reason is nature versus nurture. If a child is in a loving environment and they're just putting along and they have no crisis in their life, their personality is their personality. But let's put that child into a domestic violence situation, and a child that is being yelled at constantly, they might become fearful, and that's not part of their personality. And they might be aggressed on, and so then they are aggressive. They become aggressive. So nature versus nurture says their personality can change, right? So we always go back to the nature versus nurture kind of thing. So let's talk a little bit about these personality assessments, which are personality tools. And you are going to be taking some of these tests that are for your homework. So let's go over a few of the tests. Some are tests that you're taking and some that aren't. Some of them are really, really long and have, hundreds upon hundreds of questions. And it wouldn't really make sense to do that. But the majority of our personality tests are self-report. What does that mean? What's a self-report test?
A test that revolves around you.
Yeah, that you talk about yourself about. So nobody else is doing it, you're doing it. So it's an objective test or an inventory. That's another word for a test, an inventory that describes your personality traits based on what you say. So most tests are questionnaires, and you're kind of being held to like a social desirability scale. So a very common test is called the MMPI. And the MMPI is it's the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. That's what it stands for. But it is the most widely used and the most researched personality, I should say self-report personality test. So it came about in the 1940s, originally to look at abnormal personalities. And then they started to use it to talk about people that are lying or truthful to make a good impression. So if you apply to Target today, you will take an MMPI test when you apply to Target. That's actually what they use with Target. So it's used around the world to assess personality and to predict outcomes. Then in 1992, they came out with a big 5-factor assessment. That was that OCEAN. And so that assessment test or that inventory kind of puts you on a scale for all 5 of those. So you'll be on a scale for openness, you'll be on a scale for conscientiousness, you'll be on a scale for extroversion, you'd be on a scale for agreeableness, and you'll be on a scale for neuroticism. There's something called the MBTI, which is also widely used. It's called the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. The Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. And that test is actually putting you on scales as well, but it's different than the 5 factors. So for Myers-Briggs, you get put on a scale for extroversion versus introversion, and sensing versus intuition, and thinking versus feeling, and judgment versus perception. That's what that judges you. There are a couple other tests. Have you guys heard of the Rorschach inkblot test? Anybody heard of that? It's basically these ink blots, and it goes back to the Freudian times to talk about what you see in a picture. So, especially when it was Freudian, they were very sexual. But the concept is that you're taking these tests to let us know what's in your unconscious. So if you see something in those tests, then it is, it's not a very successful test. I'll be honest with you. It started many, many, many moons ago, but it didn't mean that it was correct. It was supposedly a window to your unconscious. The most common projective test, and you guys did them when you were in school, in middle school and grade school, and that was called a thematic apperception test, a thematic apperception test. And a thematic apperception test is basically using some sort of ambiguous stimuli, and in this case, it would usually be a picture, and you had to write a story about what was going on in that picture. Now, the majority of the time that you did that in middle school or whatever was because they were testing your writing skills. They wanted to see that you could write a short story or a paragraph and you would make sense and you knew punctuation and you knew all that kind of stuff about writing. But if you are going in a psychological test of a thematic apperception test, there would be a picture and you would write about it, and then a psychologist would interpret what you wrote about, which you guys have seen it on like Law and Order and SVU, where they have young kids that were exposed to stuff and they ask them to draw pictures. That's sort of like a thematic apperception test, because by drawing these pictures for the psychologists that work for crime, I can't think of the word right now, forensic psychologists, for the forensic psychologists, they are actually illustrating something that's going on in their mind. And for young kids, drawing like that will actually be pretty telling. So they know what to draw. Like if they draw with like black crayons, then they're in like a dark mood. If there's certain things, if they put a sun in the sky, then they're, they have a positive outlook. Sometimes they draw X's over people, like draw your family, and they'll draw an X over somebody in their family, and they'll ask them why they drew that, and they won't be able to verbalize, but they're a bad guy. So they use these personality tests today, even with children. So it's using that like ambiguous stimuli. So that is how personality tests came to be. The most important piece of personality tests is that they have reliability and validity. And your homework, your assignment says you must mention reliability and validity. So you need to know what those words mean, reliability and validity. So something that is reliable is something that's consistent. So when you talk about consistency, it could be that it's the same test over and over again, or that you get similar results. If you're taking a personality test, you should get similar results each time because your personality is not changing in that window of time. So then it would be reliable because it's consistent. Validity is that it's measuring what it's supposed to measure. So a valid test, if you're taking a personality test, is about your factors of personality or your traits of personality. If it's testing your competency in math, then it's not a valid test. It's not a valid personality test, right? Because it's not testing what it should be. Your competency and mathematical skills have nothing to do with your personality. So reliability and validity are the important pieces of personality tests. Does anybody have any questions? We did a lot. If not, remember to finish your journal with your goals. That is due this Saturday, and then no more journal. We're done with that. Remember to take 2 of those personality tests in your assignment, then discuss the results with somebody and write 150 to 200 words about those personality tests and whether they're reliable and valid. And that's due on Saturday as well, in addition to your study plan and your quiz. Have a good week. We're almost done.
Take care.
Sure.
Have a good one.